If you move past this without stopping, nothing outside of you will collapse. No alarm will sound. No door will slam shut behind you. But something inside you, something that has been quietly leaning forward for a long time, may settle back into waiting. And the waiting may continue. Not because this message carries some rare power that only appears once. Not because you owe it your attention. Not because missing it would mean you failed at something. But because what is happening right now in the interior of human consciousness, in the quiet architecture of how people are beginning to see themselves and reality, is shifting in a way that most people will only recognize long after the window has passed. Something in you recognized the title before your mind had time to argue with it. That recognition is not accidental. It is a signal worth following. Before this message ends, you will move through 4 thresholds. Each one is a layer. Each layer reveals something that the previous one was preparing you to receive. The first is what consciousness actually is, not as a concept, but as a living process you are already inside. The second is what the leap means, and why this particular moment in history carries a weight unlike others before it. The third is what stands between you and the crossing. And the fourth, the one most people never fully reach, is what becomes possible on the other side. Let us begin. I'm Daniel, and this is Gnostic Talk. And I want to start here, at the very foundation, because almost everything that gets said about consciousness starts in the wrong place. It starts with the brain. It starts with neurons and electrical signals, and the assumption that awareness is something the body produces, the way a furnace produces heat, something that happens inside matter, something that stops when the matter stops. But sit with a different possibility for a moment, just as a possibility, a lens, a doorway. What if consciousness is not produced by you, but is the space in which you arise? What if awareness is not something your brain generates, but something your brain participates in? This is not a new idea. It appears in the oldest contemplative traditions across every culture that has ever asked the question seriously. Some call it pure awareness. Some call it witness consciousness. Some call it the ground of being. Some call it remembrance, a return to something that was never truly absent. Modern neuroscience, in its own language, is beginning to circle toward questions it once dismissed. The so-called hard problem of consciousness, why subjective experience exists at all, remains unsolved precisely because the tools of the material sciences were built to measure objects, not the awareness that observes them. You cannot use the eye to see the eye. You cannot use the mind to fully contain the mind. And yet, here you are, aware, watching, sensing something behind the words, not just the words themselves. That something is what this message is about. I spent several weeks researching the intersection of ancient wisdom traditions and the emerging science of consciousness for this very topic, and what I found kept stopping me mid-sentence. Because the convergence, the way these completely separate streams of inquiry are arriving at the same threshold, is unlike anything I had encountered before in years of exploring this subject. Here is what that convergence suggests. Consciousness is not a byproduct. It is not an accident of sufficient biological complexity. It may be the primary medium of reality, the field in which all experience, all matter, all relationship, all meaning arises and is held. And if that is even partially true, even symbolically true, then it changes everything about how you understand your own inner life. Because it means that what happens inside you is not a reaction to reality. It may be a participation in reality. Have you ever walked into a room and felt the entire quality of the room shift, not because anything physical changed, but because something in you changed? Have you ever been in a conversation where the other person suddenly softened, not because you said something different, but because something inside you released? Before we continue, I want to show you something that could completely change how you see reality creation. Most people spend years collecting fragments of knowledge without ever finding the complete picture. That's exactly why we built the Quantum Talk Complete Library. It brings together frequency stabilization, observer state mechanics, timeline navigation, and synchronicity decoding into one practical system. If you've enjoyed the teachings we've explored on this channel, you're going to love what's inside. You can find it through the link in the description below or by scanning the QR code on your screen. I'll give you a second to do that. Have you ever arrived at a problem in a different inner state and found that the problem looked genuinely different, not metaphorically, but structurally different? That is not coincidence. That is not wishful thinking. That is the edge of something real. Consciousness interacts. It does not merely receive. It does not sit passively behind the eyes like a passenger watching through glass. It moves. It shapes the quality of what it touches. It is, in ways science is still learning to measure and tradition has always known, generative. Now, this does not mean you can think your way out of genuine difficulty. It does not mean that suffering is simply a failure of perspective. It does not mean that every hard thing in your life was authored by a thought you should have caught sooner. That would be a distortion, and it would not honor the weight of what real human lives carry. But it does mean this: the quality of your awareness, the texture, the depth, the openness or the contraction of the consciousness you are bringing to this moment is not a small variable. It may be the central variable. Pattern becomes the lens becomes the life. And the leap begins when you notice the lens. Let your shoulders drop slightly. Let the breath be a little slower. Feel the space behind your eyes, not as a technique, but as a recognition. You are already aware. The question is how deeply you are willing to move into that awareness. The second threshold is waiting. There are moments in history when something shifts not just in the world, but in the collective interior of humanity. Not through revolution, not through legislation, not through any external force, but through a quiet, accelerating change in what millions of people are beginning to notice about themselves. We are inside one of those moments right now. And I want to be precise about what I mean by that, because precision matters here. This is not a claim that everything is suddenly becoming perfect. It is not a promise that the world's difficulties are dissolving. Anyone paying attention knows that the external landscape of this time is genuinely turbulent. But turbulence is often the condition that precedes a leap. Think of what happens to water just before it changes state, just before the molecules reorganize. There is a period of agitation, of seemingly intensified disorder that is not the opposite of transformation. It is the process of transformation. Something analogous may be occurring in human consciousness right now. Millions of people across traditions and cultures and belief systems are reporting the same internal phenomenon. A sense that the old frameworks are no longer quite fitting. A sense that the way they were taught to understand themselves, as separate, as primarily physical, as fundamentally alone in their interiority, no longer accounts for what they are actually experiencing. The hunger for depth is at a historical high. The dissatisfaction with surface-level answers, with distraction as a substitute for meaning, is not a personal failing. It is a collective signal. And here is what I personally think is the most significant and underrated dimension of this shift. It is not happening at the level of ideas. It is happening at the level of direct experience. People are not simply reading different books. They are waking up differently. They are feeling into their own awareness in ways they do not yet have full language for. And that experiential shift, that interior reorganization, is the thing the old frameworks were not built to accommodate. I remember a period in my own life when I was consuming every philosophical and spiritual text I could find, filling notebooks, taking notes in the margins, building elaborate maps of understanding. And one night, I was in the Philippines, and it was late, one of those still nights where the air feels different. I put the last book down and sat in silence. And I noticed something I had been moving too quickly to notice before. That the awareness reading all those books was itself already the thing all the books were pointing toward. The seeker and the sought were not in two different places. That recognition did not come from a book. It came from a moment of stillness in the right conditions. That is what this window offers. Not more information, not a better system, not a more sophisticated framework to carry around. A different relationship to the awareness you are already living inside. Contemporary neuroscience is documenting something that wisdom traditions have described for centuries, that sustained practices of inner attention physically reorganize the brain. Neuroplasticity is not a metaphor. The architecture of perception can genuinely change. What you repeatedly attend to, what you repeatedly return your awareness to, begins to reshape the instrument through which you experience everything. But the leap that is happening now is faster than any individual practice, because collective fields of awareness interact. When enough people begin to shift their center of gravity from the chattering surface of the mind to the deeper, quieter awareness underneath, something happens in the shared field of human consciousness that makes the next shift easier for those who come after. This is why traditions spoke of teachers and lineages, not because the teaching was the point, but because presence itself is transmissible. Awareness that has been deepened can meet awareness that is deepening and recognize something together that neither could fully articulate alone. You are not receiving information right now. You are potentially touching something. The leap begins when you notice the lens. And the third threshold, the one about what actually stands between you and the crossing, is where most people slow down. Not because it is too difficult, but because it is too close. Here is the thing no one tells you clearly enough. The obstacle between you and the greatest leap of your consciousness is not a lack of information. It is not a spiritual practice you have not yet discovered. It is not a belief system you need to acquire or a teacher you have not yet found. The obstacle, if we are being genuinely honest, is an identity. Not a broken identity, not a wrong identity, not an identity that deserves shame or erasure, but an identity that was built in an earlier chapter. An identity that was constructed by a younger version of you with the intelligence and resources that younger version had available to navigate conditions that may no longer fully exist. Before we continue, some of what I've learned simply never makes it onto YouTube. That's why we have Insights Academy, a free newsletter where I go deeper into hidden knowledge, ancient wisdom, metaphysics, and the nature of consciousness, the knowledge we don't share in these videos. And when you sign up, you'll receive the Kabbalion as a welcome gift. You'll find it through the link in the description below or by scanning the QR code on your screen. I'll give you a moment to do that. And here is what that identity does, with extraordinary consistency, every time a new possibility appears. It observes the new possibility through the lens of the old self. It measures what is possible through what was previously survivable. It reads the invitation to leap, and it translates it into the language of risk. Have you ever stood at the edge of a genuine inner shift? A moment when something in you felt called to let go of a story you had been carrying for years and felt the entire body resist. Not because the shift was dangerous, but because the self that would have to soften in order to allow it had become so familiar that releasing it felt like a kind of disappearance. Have you ever been offered something, real love, genuine opportunity, unexpected grace, and felt an immediate, involuntary search for what was wrong with it? Have you ever begun to grow and then, just as the growing became undeniable, quietly found a way to return to where you started? This is not weakness. This is identity doing what identity does. Identity maintains coherence. It protects the continuity of the self across time. Without that function, human life would be genuinely destabilizing. So the mind is not wrong to do this. It is doing exactly what it was trained to do. Thank the mind for trying to protect you. Then gently ask whether the strategy that was built for an earlier chapter still deserves to determine the entire future. The traditions that understood this most clearly did not call it a personality flaw. They called it sleep. Not as an insult, as a description. A kind of trance in which the limited self is so convincingly presented as the whole self that the deeper awareness underneath it goes unrecognized. And the leap, the actual leap, is not acquiring something new. It is waking up inside what is already there. I want to share something that happened when I was preparing this particular message. I found myself resisting writing the section you are reading right now. Not consciously, but there was a friction in me, a hesitation that I recognized only when I stopped and looked at it directly. It was the same thing I am describing to you. A part of me that was comfortable with explaining the leap in abstract terms, and uncomfortable with being this specific about what the obstacle actually is. Because being specific means it applies to me too. It has always applied to me too. Your struggle is not being dismissed here. Your effort is not being erased. Your tiredness is not being judged. But something in you, something that has been patient and has been waiting, is ready to stop negotiating with the old version and step through. Not because I am telling you to, but because you already feel it. The obstacle has a specific texture. It speaks in a recognizable voice. It may say, "I am not ready yet." It may say, "I need to understand more before I can change." It may say, "This sounds true for other people, but my situation is genuinely different." All of those are understandable. All of those are the old identity doing its job. And beneath all of them, quieter, steadier, patient in a way the surface mind rarely is, there is an awareness that knows, that has always known, that has been waiting, not for better information, but for you to be still enough to hear it. The leap begins when you notice the lens. And the fourth threshold, the one about what becomes available on the other side, is where this message has been traveling the entire time. Take a slow breath. Let the shoulders soften. Feel the room around you, the body in the chair, the breath moving through. You are still here. That means the door is still open. Let us walk through it together. There is something that becomes available on the other side of genuine observation that is almost impossible to describe before you have touched it yourself. Not success exactly, not peace exactly, something quieter than both, and more durable. It is the experience of moving through your own life without being continuously ambushed by it. Think about what that would mean for a moment. Not that difficulty disappears, not that the unexpected stops arriving at the door, but that when it does, you are already standing on ground that does not shake. This is what the leap actually opens into. Not a destination, a quality of presence, a way of meeting what comes. And I want to be honest with you here, in the way that I think this conversation deserves. Because I have spent a long time, years, not weeks, circling around this idea from every direction I could find. I read the contemplative texts. I sat with the philosophical frameworks. I followed threads through neuroscience, through ancient Gnostic writings, through the quiet margins of things most people scroll past without stopping. And what I kept returning to, what refused to let me go, was a single question that felt almost embarrassingly simple. What changes when a person finally stops fighting who they are and starts observing who they are instead? I remember the first time that question landed in my body rather than just my mind. I was sitting alone very late, far later than I should have been awake, going back through materials I had been studying for weeks. And something shifted. Not dramatically, not with any sound or light or recognizable revelation, just a kind of settling. As though a current that had been running slightly against me for a long time simply paused. I personally think that moment, that unremarkable, undramatic pause, is the most underrated entry point into everything the great wisdom traditions have ever tried to describe. Not the insight, not the breakthrough, the pause before the insight. The stillness that creates the conditions for something true to finally be heard. Because here is what becomes available when you learn to observe rather than only react. Your relationship with time changes. Not literally, the hours do not stretch, but the frantic quality, the sense of always running slightly behind some version of yourself that is already where you should be, that begins to thin. When you are no longer being continuously activated by the gap between who you are and who your mind says you should have become by now, you recover access to the present moment. And the present moment, it turns out, is where all actual movement happens. Every choice that has ever changed a life was made in a present moment by someone who was present enough to make it. Your relationship with other people changes. When you are no longer reading others primarily through the filter of old wounds, through the frequency of what has been done to you before, you begin to actually see them. Not perfectly, not without error, but with more accuracy, more curiosity, more space. And people feel that. They cannot always name what they are feeling, but they feel it. The person who observes with genuine openness draws something different from the world than the person who scans it only for confirmation of what they already believe. And your relationship with yourself changes. This is the one that matters most, and the one that is hardest to speak about without it sounding like comfort rather than precision. When you begin to identify less with every thought that moves through you, and more with the awareness that notices those thoughts, something in the architecture of your inner life reorganizes. Not by force, not by discipline alone, but by recognition. The recognition that you are not the fear, you are not the old story, you are not the heaviness that arrived before you had language to question it. You are the one who notices all of it. And that noticing, steady, patient, non-reactive, is the ground from which a genuinely different life becomes possible. I spent 3 hours one evening going back through everything I had gathered while preparing this message. And what struck me, sitting with all of it, was how consistently every tradition points toward the same interior movement. Not agreement on names, not agreement on cosmology or doctrine or practice, but agreement on direction, inward, downward through the noise, into the place that was never broken, never absent, never as far as the restless mind believed. The leap begins when you notice the lens. And the lens, you now know, is not fixed. It is not fate. It is not who you are at the deepest level. It is a pattern. And patterns, when seen clearly, when held with patience and with something approaching compassion for the version of you that needed them once, can change. Not overnight, not without effort or return, or the occasional morning when the old weight is back and you cannot immediately remember what you understood yesterday. But they can change. They are changing. Something in you recognized this message before your mind had time to explain why. That recognition is not random. It is not coincidence. It is the deepest part of you making contact with what it has been reaching toward. I'm Daniel, and this is Gnostic Talk. And if this message has moved something in you, if even one of these thresholds has opened a doorway that feels true, share it. Not for the numbers, not for the reach, but because someone in your life is sitting with the same quiet question you arrived here carrying. And they may not know yet that there is a door. Write in the comments, I am ready to notice the leap. Write it slowly, not as performance, as a quiet declaration to yourself, witnessed by others who are crossing the same threshold at this same moment. The leap is not later. It is not contingent on understanding everything first, on having resolved what remains unresolved, on becoming a more suitable version of yourself before the door opens. The leap is now, in the noticing, in the breath you are taking as this sentence reaches you, in the stillness that is already present beneath everything your mind believes is in the way. The window does not stay open in the same way forever, but right now, in this moment, in this breath, it is open. And you are standing in it. That is enough. That has always been enough. And the part of you that knows, the awareness that watches, that waits, that has never once stopped believing in your capacity to cross, that part is not worried. It has been here the whole time. Welcome back to it.